Hey there, this is the Small Fish, Big Podcast, a show for the gallus few who dream and do. If you're a small biz owner, a creative freelancer, or someone dreaming about leaving your 9-to-5, this is the podcast for you. Each week, I'll chat with an inspiring guest who will share their entrepreneurship story before we delve into a discussion about running a creative business. Thanks for tuning in. Hello and welcome to episode 11 of the Small Fish, Big Podcast. Today I'm joined by Steph Caswell, a coach who specializes in change, transformation and growth. Hey Steph.
Hello Rhiannon, how are you?
Hi, I'm good. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. So I have given a very brief introduction to you because I know that what you do is quite complex and I know that you can explain it better than I can. So can you tell us a little bit more about your business?
Yeah, of course. So I'm a qualified coach and I decided to think really hard about who I wanted to support. And I have a real interest in change and how change occurs, particularly around behavioural change, but also change, big life decisions, I guess, and how you can grow and develop from making those decisions. So my coaching is designed, I focus on helping women who often have big life changes they want to make. And predominantly, I work with people who are thinking about career change and trying to build careers or build their own businesses around something they really love, rather than being stuck maybe in the corporate world or particularly in my background, which is in teaching, in the teaching world. So trying to help women make that step, make that change, and start living lives that they really feel inspired and motivated to live. So yeah, that's what I do.
Wonderful. And I love that you have found your niche. And I'm going to ask you to tell us about your journey in a moment. Steph's journey relates so very closely to what she does, which is really what led me to ask her to be on the podcast, because I think it's so neat that something you've done yourself, you know, you've now managed to find a way to help others do the same. And I think this is a position that a lot of people find themselves in, where they feel that pull to leave a more corporate job or a more traditional sort of 9-to-5 career to do something that they're really passionate about, but it's quite a scary step. So maybe I'll let you start off telling us a little bit about your business journey and we'll go from there.
Okay, great. So as I say, prior to my coaching business, I was a teacher for 15 years and I finished my career as a teacher at the deputy head level. So I'd gone up the teaching career ladder, if you like, and got promoted to deputy headship, which at the time I was really proud of that promotion and really excited about the journey. But as the role unfolded, it became evident, I guess, that I found it much more stressful than I anticipated. And there were lots of things that I enjoyed about it, but there were lots of things that I found were just beginning to wear me down a bit. And luckily I had a fantastic head teacher that I worked with, and she and I had a very good relationship. So it was, in a way, it was a real shame that my how I was able to manage the job was impacted, because actually our relationship and the ideas we had for the leadership of the school were really joined and together, and we worked really well together. But it just became, I just started to notice that I was having trouble sleeping, and I was getting quite anxious about things that I hadn't necessarily felt anxious about before. And it just started to ebb away at my confidence and my happiness, my overall happiness. And my husband's a teacher as well, and he was sort of noticing also that things were changing in terms of how I was generally feeling in everything I was doing. And I think what happened, unfortunately, was that it was one of those situations where I've been feeling a certain way for quite a long period of time, and then it was one small event. It was a very difficult meeting that I'd had with a parent, and it was the straw that broke the camel's back, sadly. And I think if I'd felt better, I would have managed the situation better, but everything crumbled just completely. just completely fell apart, and it ended up getting signed off with anxiety, and it just really was a big turning point, because I felt a little bit like, I was thinking about this the other day, and I think at the time I said to my boss, my head teacher, you know, what had happened. She was really surprised. She was like, I just had no idea. And I think it was one of those situations where you are a certain way on the surface, but your legs are furiously paddling beneath the surface, and nobody can really see that that's how you're doing. And I think I got really good at masking how I actually felt. So I got signed off, and had a big decision to make, really. And it was one that was like, do I continue, but knowing that this isn't where my heart really was. But it was a job I knew, it was a job I could do well, but actually it was affecting me and my well-being. So it was a big decision to step down, and big discussions at home, and the pros and cons. And it's actually really tricky when you're in that situation, because you know you want to take the leap, but actually, again, the thought of taking the leap is so terrifying that you're almost stuck in this horrible place where you're sort of, I know I should do it, but I'm so terrified, and you're just sort of just sitting there all the time on the precipice, if you like. So I made a decision, and I'm very lucky. I've got a very supportive husband who was like, you need to do what's right for you. So I made the decision to stop and walk away from a job that I knew very well how to do, and into something that is different. There, you know, I know when we spoke before, I was talking about, you know, there are skills that you can transfer across from that career to this, but it was the fact that it was all down to me to make this work, and that's again quite a change. It's quite scary, and I just thought, actually, do you know what? I feel really passionately about helping other women who may be feeling the same way, and saying, actually, before you get to that point where you're signed off or you're at the doctor's and you're a blubbering mess, you know, there are ways that you can to make that change before you get there. So yeah, that's my journey.
So that is quite the journey, and you've made such a pivot in your career. So obviously coaching, you can see how some of your teaching skills would translate well into that role, but, you know, working with entirely different clientele and, you know, a totally different scope. So how did you sort of turn your own experience into a business idea? How did this come about?
I think it was because I've got a big passion and interest in personal development and self-improvement. And I think for the many years prior to leaving teaching, I'd been reading so much about it, and, you know, just thinking of things I could do to, I suppose, make myself aware of other possibilities in life. And I think when you start a career, particularly in a career like teaching, where it's sort of, it used to be the one job that teachers had, you know, when I'm sure when you were at school, when I was at school, there were teachers there who'd been there teaching at the same school for 20, 30 years, and it was a job for life. I think sadly it's changed as a profession, and I think more and more teachers are finding that that's not the case anymore. And I got to a point where when I was thinking about how much, yes, it's a scary leap, but actually when you make it, there's such a sense of relief and a burden that comes off your shoulders, and you feel just so empowered to start living life that you want to live. And it really made me think, I really want to be able to help other women to feel that way, to feel that actually it's okay to make those steps, and that there are people who've done it, and that they can support you and make the journey less stressful than you think it might be. So that was sort of where it came from, really.
Well, I think that's quite an amazing way to turn your own experience into such a positive as well. And I think, speaking from my own experience of starting a business, when I started my business, I didn't really know very many other small business owners or people that had left more traditional careers to sort of pursue that. And I did end up doing some networking and finding some podcasts and some books and things like that. And that sort of introduced me to this world until I made contacts of my own. But it can also be quite lonely. So having somebody who's there to coach you, I say from the start, but really you're helping a lot of the women you work with before they've even started, when this is just sort of a pipe dream and they're wondering if they are ready to make it a reality. So that's so nice that you can kind of guide them along and they don't feel like they have to figure out all that initial stuff and navigate that by themselves.
Absolutely. I think the way I sort of see the process is that you have to develop the right mindset to be able to make that step. And for me, I think the mindset was there, but it was almost that I got to crisis point where I thought, right, I have to make a decision now. And actually, I mean, I was lucky as a teacher, you know, we got a lot of training around growth mindset and knowing that and understanding that mistakes can be learned from and that you can always learn lessons from experiences. And so when my experience happened of having to walk away from my job, it made me realize that actually I could learn lessons from it. And the lesson that I found that I learned the most was that I need to recognize that it's okay to do these things, that you might worry about what other people will say, or you might have this opinion that actually it's safer to stay in a job where you have regular income, where you know how to do the job with your eyes closed. But actually, for me, it was around understanding that that wasn't making me happy. And I think you get to a point where you're like, do you know what, happiness means more than all those other things. And to be able to come out the other side, yes, being a business owner, as I'm sure you know, can be terrifying at times, and it can be a real roller coaster of emotion. But to try and look at it as lessons to learn and think, okay, maybe that didn't work so well, so what am I going to do next time that would make that a better situation? And I think, yeah, that's sort of how I've come to be here, is just having that kind of mindset. And I think by starting with people who are in the same position, who maybe want to leave their job, if you start on mindset first, start on the confidence side of things, and then we move into things like the clarity around it. So what does your ideal future look like? You know, to really unpick it and get to the bottom of, you know, what do you actually want to do? What would make you feel happier? What would make you feel fulfilled? What would take the stress away? And then the last part of it is, you know, the action part. So what are you going to do? What things can you start doing now to get that into being your reality? So it all starts with mindset. Absolutely.
I find the mindset stuff so interesting. So I've only kind of very recently delved a little bit into this, so I won't pretend that I know very much about it or that I'm any kind of an expert, but even just starting to think about these things a little bit differently, you're right, it is just that shift in mindset can make such a huge difference. And even for me, I think a lot of the time I tend to just go, and I think maybe a lot of other creative people are like that as well. They come up with an idea and they roll with it without really stopping to think, actually, is that in line with what I want or the lifestyle I want? So I can see so much value in having somebody sort of force you to pause and stop and just think these things through before you take the leap.
Yeah, and I think that we are often our own worst enemy. So, you know, when you're making a big decision like that, your own self-talk, your inner chatter, everything that goes on is actually the majority of the time the thing that stops people doing these big changes is their own self and their limiting beliefs that actually, oh, this wouldn't work for me. I wouldn't be able to do that, or what would my parents say, or all of these things that we bring to the table, when actually if we just had the conversations with those people and said, this is why I'm doing this. I had to have that conversation, yes, with my husband, with my children, because they were like, oh, so what do you do now? Because obviously their whole lives I'd been a teacher, and also with my parents, my family, and I can remember my sister saying to me, when I was saying to her what I wanted to do, she's like, oh, you'll never do that. You won't walk away from that. And actually that part of me was like, well, now I will. Well, now you said that. But also when you tell them why, and when you explain to people that this is why I'm doing something, I think you're often surprised